What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. Today is something quite a bit different. I'm going to be asking you, the viewer, to judge me, your host, as to whether I qualify as an anime otaku or not. Because let's be honest, at the back of a lot of people's heads, there's this stereotype that if a foreigner is living in Japan, it may be because at the heart of it all, they are originally an anime fan. So let's check out if that's true for me or not. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of my understanding of the term and also how it's used. And then I'm going to give you my background and history of myself and enjoying anime and manga. And then you can decide in the comments at the end whether you think I really qualify as a true anime otaku or not. Let's go. All right, before we get started, I just want to say that I'm not going to ask you to like or subscribe. What I'm going to ask you to do is please watch the video and decide if it's really worthy of a like or not. If it is, hit the like button. And if you haven't watched my content before, please go back and watch other stuff on my channel and decide if it's worthy of a subscribe as well, because I'm pretty regular. I put out a video every single week about Japan, society, life, and culture, and it's from the viewpoint of someone who's been here for nearly 18 years. So if that's something that you think could be of value to you, please hit the subscribe button. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. And I'm going to begin with basically the term itself. The word otaku probably most accurately translates to geek. And you see, in Japan, that can just mean about any kind of geek obsession that you have for a particular hobby. So there are train otakus, for example, people who are just really into trains. They collect photos of trains. They just hoover up any kind of trivia they can about trains. And it could be people who are really into cars or into making miniature models or whatever it might be. It's basically just obsession over a particular interest. I can absolutely lay claim to the title of otaku for one particular thing about Japanese culture, and that is Japanese woodblock prints. I really got into Japanese woodblock prints. I have 2 videos about them on my channel. You can check those out if you'd like. I'll probably make more. I became a bit of an expert on the topic. I spent hours and hours researching. I've had thousands of prints subsequently pass through my hands. I actually became a print dealer in the States. So I was dealing 19th century ukiyo-e and hanga, like basically helping to pay my way through grad school. So I am absolutely, I think, qualified to call myself an otaku when it comes to Japanese woodblock prints. However, outside of Japan, it's basically taken on just to mean geekdom over anime and manga. So that's what most people associate with the word otaku. And of course that applies in Japan as well. As for how the term itself is used, well, it's depending on who's using it, why they're using it, who their audience is, basically the motivation and the context. It can be used in a self-deprecating way, like, oh yeah, I'm a total otaku about blah blah blah. It can be used in a teasing way to say it about someone else, like, man, you are totally an otaku about blah blah blah. That, of course, can be taken to an insult level, where you can say, like, oh, you're an otaku, man, you're taking it too far. Because, remember, it kind of implies obsession. And if you're obsessive about something, obviously that can have negative repercussions. And in Japan, the term, it can be quite negative at times, because while it is a little more acceptable in Japan in terms of like the media that's produced and consumed for like moe and loli and that kind of thing, it's still not like mainstream accepted. It's not something that oh, I really like this stuff, so in Japan I'll be totally free to do what I want with it. Yeah, no, it's not like that. It's actually negative enough that there have been instances where crimes have been committed against minors, like violence or kidnapping, and the blogosphere, the Twitterverse, the even mass media will put out speculations about, well, it could be some kind of moe lori otaku who's committed this crime as kind of a criminal profile. So it can be quite negative in that sense. And like I mentioned, otaku meaning a bit obsessive, that can have a negative connotation, absolutely, but not necessarily. Now, there's two other points that I think are important to note about the whole phenomenon of otaku. The first is we have to remember that anime and manga are basically just an integrated everyday part of Japanese culture. So there's plenty of people here who like and watch anime and read manga regularly that you would never refer to as an otaku, and certainly wouldn't refer to themselves as that. Whereas if you're from France or Canada or New Zealand or wherever, you're basically consuming something from a foreign culture, and you have to kind of go out of your way to get that. So if you're into anime and you're not Japanese, well, I guess that can sort of lend itself to like immediate otakuhood. You can be accused of that more readily. Which leads me to the second important point, which is if two foreign residents meet in Japan, they don't really have automatically that idea of the stereotype in the back of their head, like, oh, this guy, he's probably here because he likes anime. I think it's just because when you've lived here, you meet a lot of different foreigners, and that stereotype just doesn't really hold much water. It's the same for Japanese people meeting foreigners. Japanese people don't meet foreigners and think, oh, this guy is probably here because he loves anime. That stereotype isn't really held by Japanese either. The most likely place you're going to encounter that stereotype is when you tell people outside of Japan that you lived in Japan, and then they might be like, oh, are you some kind of anime dork? So that might happen outside of Japan, but not usually in Japan itself. So with the sort of definitions and usage out of the way, I'd just like to give you a brief rundown of my relationship with anime, manga, etc., what I've enjoyed in the past, and then leave it to you to decide, do I qualify as an otaku, yes or no? So we have to begin in high school, which is the first time I saw any sort of anime, and that was the movies. It was a movie night with friends. We watched Ninja Scroll and Vampire Hunter D. Oh great, the noisy truck followed me down this road. Cue cutscene. Yeah, one of the things about doing this as a walk and talk rather than filming in a room in my house is that a lot of the cuts you see are because some super loud scooter passed me or a truck or something. One of the disadvantages of doing this style of vlog. Oh, another disadvantage of doing this style of vlog. When you just kind of wander, sometimes you wander into dead ends that are unmarked and didn't even realize it was a dead end. Try again, take two. Then I went off to university, and that was the first time I watched an anime that I would say probably changed who I am as a person. And I know that sounds really heavy, but I was watching the show Rurouni Kenshin, and I was in kind of some dark places in my life at the time. And as a result of like his strength of character and personal philosophy, it kind of helped me through those points in my life. Now, I could go into more detail, but I think that would be a video in and of itself. So if you want to see that video, I could maybe make that in the future. But suffice to say is I really enjoyed that series, and I've watched it, front to back more than once. That being said, even though I was exposed to other animes in university days, I never actually really watched any. You also have to remember that this is the late 90s when I'm in university, so this is before Crunchyroll, this is before a lot of animes got official releases outside of Japan, which means that these were basically copied discs that were being passed around, and they were all fan subbed. Like, there weren't official studio translations yet, so like fan sub was basically the only way you could get Japanese anime and understand it unless you spoke Japanese. So I graduated from university. I came to Japan on the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, JET program, and now you might think, oh, this is the time when you really got into anime because you were surrounded by it. And yeah, once you come to Japan, you are surrounded by it, but again, this is the days before Crunchyroll and a lot of English translation releases were available. So I came to Japan with very little Japanese ability at the beginning, so I was surrounded by basically media I couldn't consume because I wasn't going to be able to understand it. So during my JET time, I basically found myself in the land of anime and manga and was unable to really enjoy any of it. The only anime that I remember watching during those years was, probably downloaded from Napster in those days, and that was Cowboy Bebop. And while that is pretty much canon for a lot of people who love anime, that's one of those weird ones that's actually far better known outside of Japan than in Japan for whatever reason. After that, I think somewhere in there I watched Evangelion for the first time, and I remember really enjoying the first part of it, but then when they got to like the last 6 episodes where it's just lots of like flashing of scenes over and over again, I remember thinking, they ran out of money, didn't they? Like, the studio had no money to make like real animation for the last episodes, so they're just doing this repeat crap. I would not call myself an Evangelion fan. I've watched the movies and enjoyed them to a certain extent, but I think a real Evangelion fan would not accept me as being a true fan. By the end of the JET program, I've married my Japanese wife, and we've moved to the States for me to go to grad school. And she was missing Japan quite a bit, so I found myself actually, I think a lot of the money I made from my woodblock print business was actually me spending it on dramas and animes that my wife wanted to get because she was missing Japan and, Japanese culture so much. So during that time, she wanted to watch animes from her childhood, so we bought basically the entire series of Gundam. So I got to watch that, all of City Hunter, and Inuyasha was kind of popular at that time, and so someone was getting away with having it on YouTube, so we watched Inuyasha on YouTube. Of those, I think probably Gundam was my favorite, because it was just amazing to watch that level of animation, considering the time period it was produced compared to like what the States was doing at that time. Then we moved back to Japan, and my Japanese is at a better level at this point, so I can enjoy, anime on TV. My wife quite often watched like the Detective Conan, and then she got into the series Bleach and turned me on to that, so I watched all of those. But then basically after that entered a really big dry spell where I didn't watch any anime whatsoever. I did during that time period read the Hananokeiji manga series, which if you don't know it, you might not, because it was never turned into an anime to my knowledge. But it's basically historical fiction surrounding the samurai Maeda Keiji end of warring states period. Toyotomi Hideyoshi is pretty much united Japan at this point, so it's characters like Hideyoshi, Date Masamune, Sanada Yukimura, Tokugawa Ieyasu. So I quite enjoyed that manga. It was hard because there was a lot of like old style Japanese used, so instead of saying anata or teme or something like that, it was onushi. It was language like that, which took a little bit of getting used to, but I don't know if but that was really the only anime or manga that I was into at that time. So after that, it really took having a kid to get back into it again. And that came in the form of Kimetsu no Yaiba, which is Demon Slayer in English title. So I watched that with the kid and quite enjoyed that, and have enjoyed watching the episodes come out every week on Sunday of the newest part of the series. And that kind of rekindled this idea of like, oh yeah, I used to really like watching anime on occasion. Why don't I, dedicate a little bit of my time in the evenings to watching some and catching up on what's been popular in the past 7 years or so that I hadn't watched anything. So I watched, as a result of this, I watched Jujutsu Kaisen and Attack on Titan. And I've also taken on the guilty pleasure of watching the podcast Trash Taste. And I don't know, I just really enjoy watching those guys. They're super charismatic, but I also realized that, 90% of the anime that they reference on their podcast, I'd never heard of, much less seen. So as a result of watching that podcast, just last night, I began watching JoJo. So JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I'm going to say I'm 6 episodes in, and it is entertaining and really charming in a way that I'm not sure I'm qualified to break down yet, but I am enjoying it. So yeah, that's the most recent. But that's basically it. I don't think I've left anything out in terms of what I've watched or seen, except maybe Ghibli movies, but I don't really put those in the same category as like anime series because I don't know. It's more like watching a Disney movie than, like a Japanese Disney. No. I'm not likening Ghibli to Disney. They're very, very, very much not the same thing. So don't jump on me for that. But what I mean is, watching those singular full-length movies, I don't think is the same kind of level as like sitting down and binge watching 6 episodes of JoJo in an evening, or watching the entire Jujutsu Kaisen episodes over the course of a week or something like that. Not quite the same thing. So now I leave it to you. Am I or am I not an anime otaku? Do I fit the stereotype of just another dude in Japan who's here because he loves anime? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, if you did in the end like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you want more content. Well, maybe not quite like this. I don't do a lot of videos just kind of talking about me, but yeah, if you enjoy the idea of content, Japan, society, life, and culture from the view of a long-term resident, I invite you to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching this particular video, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.